All right, welcome once again. And we have Emmy Hart, or Hart, with us. So thanks, Hart. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, so your resume is so impressive, and some really, it's great that you have so many options to you in your life, that you've chosen to come here to Virginia Beach and really become part of the Edgar Cayce work. So I honor you for that, and I'm also very glad for the organization and the people that are members and served by the A.R.E. So maybe we can start. You're from Kentucky. I know you got
from Kentucky.
Your law degree you got from the University of Kentucky. Now, you grew up not too far from Hopkinsville. I think you said that you would do sports, and then Hopkinsville High or something was one of the teams you would play against?
Yeah, so we played basketball and football, and then when you go to the state tournament, people from all over the state would be there, or the regional conferences, they would be there.
Yeah.
And Hopkinsville was one of the teams that was sort of in our region. And so what's interesting is growing up in Kentucky, I never heard about Edgar Cayce, which was really strange. I had to come to Virginia Beach to hear about it.
A lot of people in Virginia Beach have never heard of Edgar Cayce either.
Well, hopefully they're able to find out about him now. But when you were talking about my resume, it's interesting about the resume is I never think about the resume, and people always ask, how did that sort of happen? And it's sort of like all of us, I just keep doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
And you probably in some ways feel you're not even the same person that you were.
I'm not.
In those past incarnations.
But I'm benefited from learning those things.
Yes.
So I bring the skills from those things into sort of this space.
It all weaves at some point. At some point, all of that we've been and learned somehow is part of what we do. Like when I studied acting, I thought I'd left that behind. Little did I know, once a year or so, I'd portray Edgar Cayce. So it's kind of followed me.
Well, see, we have that in common.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I studied acting, and I was and I actually sort of bring that through my work with Edgar Cayce. One of the things that I did recently, or last year, was to read an Edgar Cayce reading for the A.R.E. staff. And I read it from the perspective of what might it have been like to be within a reading. And I was inspired to do that by our friend, rest in power, June Bro.
Mm-hmm.
In attending the chats with June here at A.R.E. on those Tuesday mornings, off and on for like 7 years or whenever she was doing those, and she had this way of bringing Edgar Cayce, the man, and the life around him at that time so vibrantly to life. Mm-hmm. That it really shifted my relationship with the material.
Yes, we were so blessed to have her here for so many years.
Oh my goodness.
And doing those like Tuesdays with June.
Yeah, chats with June.
Yeah, that's right.
And then we did an interview with her in the sort of the final years of her life to capture some of these stories, and that was shown at Congress, I think a couple of years ago, or maybe last year, not last year, year mm-hmm. before last. But it was through June's connection to the living man. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that June and both Harmon would talk about, and June would tell me these stories, like when they came in, they were so young and bright-eyed and excited, and the Cayces had been doing this for sort of forever.
Yeah.
And she was like, she had such marker memories of the mystery and wonder mm-hmm. of it, but then she also had such reverence for the impact of his work. And I'm thinking, wow, I mean, what must it have been like to have lived and witnessed some of those things? Yeah. And so
I'm sure in some ways you didn't really know the gravity of it till afterwards. It was like there's so many times in life that we're living through something, and then we look back and see how important that was. And so in some ways, I think maybe she and Harmon, because I know Harmon spent a good part of the rest of his life trying to find other Edgar Cayces, and he realized that
they could.
Edgar Cayce was a phenomenon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And she at the end of her life really had marker memories and recognized when she told the story of the little child who came in, and the parents were desperate about trying to find a cure, and then they came out, and then they brought the child back some months later, and he was cured. I mean, that must have been miraculous. And so it was so miraculous to her that sorry, she has tears in her eyes. And because of the acting that and one of the things you do in acting is you develop an incredible level of empathy and literally the ability to put yourself in someone else's mind, body, spirit. And that's the approach that I switched to using when I look at the Cayce material. So when I read his biographies, when I try to imagine myself as a soul in that space, not the literal man, but as a soul in that space, in that mind space, then emotions and spirit awakenings open up within to say, I wonder if it was like this, I wonder if it was like that. And it helps your own internal exploration to understand how to navigate what's going on in your own life a little bit better.
Now where in your journey did you find Edgar Cayce? And then where in your journey did that, like what about the Cayce readings are, 10,000 different subjects. What did you hone in on as your personal interest in Cayce?
Edgar Cayce came into my life probably in a unique way. And where in my journey was I speak on a lot of different topics. And one of the topics I speak on is as someone who's lived through some really challenging early life experiences, so adverse childhood experiences. And one of those is as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and some other things. I did interviews last year with an organization called 1 in 6, and there are like 19 interviews that tell stories about the trauma. So
yes,
Edgar,
and that's the
Thriver's Quest.
The springboard of your book, right?
It is, yeah.
Thriver's Quest, healing life's traumas to bring out your best.
Yeah, healing life's traumas to bring out your best. And I met Edgar Cayce on my healing quest. And on my healing quest, I was looking for stories of other boys or men who had lived through difficult things that science wasn't looking at and no one could explain.
Was this already as an adult? Was this
as an adult? I was in my early 20s.
Oh, I see.
And but I was introduced to Edgar Cayce through a visit to Virginia Beach and a friend of mine. And then when I found out he was from Kentucky, I wanted to read his book. And then when I read his book, and he had a traumatizing event at 4 when his grandfather was killed and he witnessed it.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I had a traumatizing event at 4. And as I was tracking it through, when he had the bullying at 10, and wow, I had the bullying.
Being called the freak.
Yeah, being called the freak and that. Yeah. And so having had similar experiences as a human being, and so I looked at how he navigated through that. And so he came into my life as just someone to help me understand, oh, you can live through this and get past it. Oh, you can live through this and get past it. You can live through this and get past it. And then when I discovered what a service he offered and a legacy he left, then I got really curious. Okay, how do you navigate out of that, all that stuff you lived through, and still find your service and then find a way to offer it to the world? That's what hooked me. And it is, and then I began, I began reading other books by him, and then I came to the A.R.E. and I became a member, and then I heard you talk, I heard John Van Auken talk, I heard Kevin talk, and so it was, I just wove it into my life.
Which one did you like better? No, I'm just kidding.
Let me see, that's tough. I don't think, I think, I haven't heard the one I like better yet.
We'll erase that.
I think it's coming up.
We're going to erase that final script.
No, I have to tell you, one of the things I love about having had the opportunity to hear you speak over the years and having the opportunity to hear Kevin and John, what's interesting is how you develop and change and grow and offer. One of the things I really appreciate is how you will present one thing one year and then you'll do some research, same topic, but you'll present it in a little bit different way maybe the next year. Or you'll even say, well, I used to say this, but now I think this. And I think that's brilliant because in order to be a lifelong learner, you have to recognize that at this stage, this is what I understood.
Well, I think that helps keep Cayce's work from being like a museum piece, and seeing it as something alive.
Yes.
And that if it's alive, how does it relate to other ways of thinking, and how does it grow? Because I think like Cayce always talks about how spirituality is a growth. And so we grow in understanding his work and we grow as people, and something that made sense at one stage in our life, it may have, it's like a dream. If you interpret it, the interpretation grows. So I'm glad that you've also shared that.
Well, when I took your life coaching class,
Mm-hmm.
your certification. I was in the
Mm-hmm.
first group. I remember we had that.
I remember that. The first one is always like,
I know.
how do we
And I
fit
made
it
a
all
mistake,
in?
and I said, well, you know, I love that because I know people are going to put too much work in it. You were like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
But I love being a part of pilots like that.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the presenter and the students are all in the same space.
Yes.
It's like we're all learning together, we're all doing together. And so there's this fascinating synergy that happens, and the focus and the intensity, and we all take all this stuff away from it. So that was my experience. But when you said, how did I get into the readings? I got into the 254 series, which is what's called the work readings, after doing the certification. Because I thought, life coaching from a business perspective, I haven't looked at Cayce's from a business perspective.
Yes.
And if I was going to do that, the 254, well, the founding of the A.R.E. and the meetings around that, and that's what got me into the readings.
And that's become your life coaching business is really, it's an executive, but it's also, what is it, leadership development, executive coaching. So you've taken what you learned here, and through the work readings, you've created a kind of, maybe it's like a spiritual or a holistic kind of business coaching.
So the work here has expanded my work. So I started out as an attorney, and then I did social and emotional
Right, and an attorney, and your focus in college was Russian, so you're fluent. I've heard you speak Russian.
Yeah,
you're fluent in Russian.
Yeah, like I said, I just kept doing the next thing.
Maybe it's like that reading where you say the hope for the world comes out of Russia. So maybe when that happens, well, we'll need you to lead the way.
There's a whole lot of work that needs to happen if that's going to come to pass. We have to survive to get that far.
Yes.
But it was interesting in reading that, because you look at the layer of life from the government level, but then you look at a country from a spiritual level, which is what's fascinating about the Cayce material, is on what level are you living? Or on what level are you focusing?
Well, it's like you said, like Cayce would see a country like a person, and everybody, even if a person's manifesting one thing, Cayce could see the latent potentials that are in that. And so I think in the United States and Russia and China, which he said was the hope for Christianity, or the cradle for Christianity, I think he was seeing the potentials that are there that hopefully would come to fruition.
Well, what's fascinating is in China particularly, it's one of the fastest areas in the world where Christianity is growing. Both China and Africa are both. And so what's interesting when you go back and look at the Cayce readings and you see the potential and you see how much of that potential is manifesting today, it ties us to the sort of the mystery and wonder of that. And that's sort of fascinating for me.
Well, let's come back to you and the work you're doing here with the Cayce with the A.R.E. And I know that the Cayce material had a personal resonance with you. And I think that it did with me too, and I think that sparks it within us, and then we become, take it from our personal application, and we want to become part of the work. And then from there, from working through your own trauma, seeing how Edgar Cayce healed with his trauma, you've taken that to your work with intuition and helping people use intuition to heal trauma.
Yes.
Let's springboard on that. Tell me more about where that goes with you.
Well, one of the first things that you have to do is turn to and face yourself. So I was looking at Edgar Cayce's work and Carl Jung's work. And in Carl Jung's work, you know, they talk about the shadow. And what we put into the shadow is all the things about ourselves that we don't like and don't want to deal with, we kind of repress.
Yeah.
Well, what I discovered going through my life is, you know, if what you don't look at controls you. And so as a part of my own healing, I had to turn and look at what happened in my life. And there's another quote by, I think, James Baldwin, which says, not everything that we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so I couldn't change the impacts of what I'd lived through on my life because I couldn't go back and change that. But I could go back and look and see, oh, this is where that comes from. Oh, I don't need to do that anymore. Oh, this is where that comes from. So I attended groups called Survivors of Incest Anonymous. And there were men and women coming together, and they were coming together for the purpose of healing. And in that group, it's very much like the Search for God groups, or any group where humans come together for the whole purpose of healing. In those groups, what fell away was the social stereotypes of gender, social stereotypes of ethnicity and race. Everyone was there for the whole sole purpose of healing. And in those groups, I learned, oh my goodness, we all need to be living off of this level. But then when we walk out into the world, we're not. You're kind of confronted with the stereotypes.
Yeah.
And so, but my own healing journey taught me that it is possible. And I really came to understand what Edgar Cayce meant is you can do what I do, which I interpret as align your soul with the divine to figure out who you are and why you're here if you're willing to pay the price. His price was really high. And looking at, but what inspires me about his work and what still inspires me is even as after he got knocked down, he kept going back to pay the price. And the price was being called a freak. The price was being betrayed by people that you love. The price was trying to live from your Christian values, even at the hospital, you know.
Getting kicked out of the church.
Getting kicked out of the church.
Going to jail.
Yeah, so his price was really high. And what I admired and find inspiring and still have a question, wait, how did you do that? And then when I was reading My Life as a Seer, which I encourage everyone to read so that you can get a emotional and spiritual sense. We talk about mind, body, spirit. Spirit is the life, mind is the builder, the physical is the result. We don't often look at someone and wonder, wow, what's happening with their spirit? What's happening with their emotional journey? Where are they on? And so a part of my journey led to writing Thriver's Quest, Healing Life's Traumas to Bring Out Your Best, because I didn't discover that they came through me, these universal healing steps that we have to go through. And what I think is they just keep coming up in different ways, And at some point in our journey, we all have to survive through something. At some point, we have to search for understanding about something. At some point, we have to fight to figure out who we are and where we fit in. And then when we get those realizations, we have a choice. Do I go back and change those? How do I go forward? Can I apply these realizations to my own healing? And one of the things that we do when we heal is, wow, then we get excited about, can I share? If I share what I've learned so that it could possibly help others, then my life begins to open up and thrive. And when I look through that lens, and I look at Edgar Cayce's journey through that lens, even we would like for him to have been here longer, his thriving was in being of service one person at a time. I think that is the most beautiful, and not being locked in labels, like his saying, not calling himself a psychic or not calling himself he would talk about this phenomena. And then the other thing, even today I get really touched by this because I just did research for an affirmation conference. Edgar Cayce, right after he lost the hospital, was doing public talks. And he was talking about the phenomena. And he did a reading, and he said, what should I say? Because he was like still feeling insecure after all those years, and he lost the hospital, but they were saying, we want you to talk about the phenomena. And Edgar, I don't really know what to talk about. And the reading said, when you are aligned, you'll know what to say. And in that talk, he said, this is what I believe, and people might disagree with me. Until God is your God, until whatever source you have chosen as your ideal source of information is yours, then it cannot mean all that it can mean in your life. And to me, that was a moment when the man and the spirit and the connection between the conscious and the unconscious sort of opened up, and he was able to speak about what was going on inside of him at a conscious level that had probably evaded him for all the years. He was just evolving to open up to be able to speak from that conscious place. And I was like, oh, it's too bad, because what else would have come, you know what I mean? We lost him too soon because he had now gotten to the point where he had done research. He was reading and studying the readings and working with his son Hugh Lynn and other people around that when they founded the A.R.E. They committed to doing research on the phenomena, and everybody wanted to find an Edgar Cayce. But Edgar Cayce knew that what people needed to be finding, what they needed to search to find, was their connection to the divine. And when he said,
oh, yes,
if you find your connection with the divine, then the world will be a better place. If you bring the best you, and you know, I bring the best me, then...
Well, that's where I always say that you know, if we have a new age, we must have had an old age.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that the old age or the previous age was that the Jesus, the healer, was outside of you. So you'd go to Jesus, you go to Edgar Cayce, and I think the new age is finding, like you're saying, finding that we can do what Edgar Cayce did and what Jesus did as we evolve, but that I think the new age path is finding that access within, like you're highlighting. But I also want to underscore something that I think is really important. As you know, in the life coaching course, we talked about trauma and about healing trauma. And I think that what keeps Edgar Cayce alive is when we take his work and we apply it to kind of what's coming into the collective consciousness to be healed.
Yes.
And I think that if you look at what's been going on in the last 10, 15 years, is that we're finally coming to a place of dialogue about trauma.
Yes.
And understanding that. Work with Brene Brown, different authors saying, you know, it's time to talk about that. And the role trauma plays in addiction, and the way that addiction is about secrecy and shame.
Yes.
And so I think that taking Edgar Cayce into the realm of healing trauma and being brave yourself. By brave, I mean not like running into a fire, but making yourself vulnerable to talk about your own sexual abuse. And, you know, especially for men, you know, that's not something, you know, it's something difficult to talk about for men and women, but for men more so because of the way it goes against the stereotype of what a man is supposed to be.
Right.
And so in you doing this and bringing this out of the closet, out of the shame place, that, you know what, this is something that happened. It's something that I've actually, like Cayce said, I've turned it into something constructive and positive. And let's join together in this healing journey. And so I just want to underscore that. And it just,
thank you.
It's a blessing
that you're
doing that. And I think that many, many people will be helped through your work in this direction.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I'm not the only one. I mean, there are hundreds of men coming forward now. I mean, at that 1in6.org, there are videos from over 100 men. I mean, I have 19 videos.
Praise be
that
to
talk
God.
about.
Thank
That's
God
what I
that's
say. And the other thing, too, is the subtitle of my book is for male survivors and those who love them. What people don't understand is the statistics are horrific around that type of abuse, but all kinds of abuse. But it's 1 in 3 little girls and 1 in 6 little boys who have to deal with unwanted behavior of a sexual nature before the age of 18. What that means is that there are millions of men and women who have been suffering in silence, who need to stop that suffering, and they need to heal as soon as possible. And so the scope of trauma is so wide. And then the research on adverse childhood experiences, it's not just sexual abuse, it's bullying, it's all the stuff that Edgar Cayce lived through. I mean, he was bullied, he had some physical abuse. If you looked at his life through the lens of adverse childhood experiences, but then when you look back, you're like, if we look at all of our parents' lives, you know, we don't often think, what did our parents live through? What kind of traumas did they have to overcome, and were they doing the best they could do based on what they lived through? I find that fascinating.
Well, in my current research, personal research with the Cayce readings and just looking at our times is trying to come to an understanding of suffering. Because I think that one of the things the New Age tries to do is it tries to take esoteric concepts and makes them accessible to people. And I think that the meaning and purpose of suffering, even wonderful things have been written about it, I still don't think that the average person really has. See, I think it becomes a touch point for, I don't believe in God. I've given up on God. If children suffer, how can there be a God? But I think that then if you're going to believe in God, then there must be some purpose and meaning in suffering, which then becomes a challenge to try to understand that. In the work, in the work that I've been doing, it sounds very preposterous, but that suffering offers us a tremendous opportunity for soul growth. And it's in the Cayce readings. That, you know, there's one reading where Cayce says, why do you suffer? Because God loves you. That's why you suffer.
Ooh, this is hard.
And it's in a way, there's things that you have to work through and let go of. And so suffering becomes part of that healing, that process. You know, in a nutshell, I think that a life that's full of bonbons and easy seems wonderful to the ego,
Yeah.
but a life where we've had challenges and had to overcome them is much more of a fruitful soul life. So even when people contact their guides and they ask, why have I suffered so much? They'll say, it's nothing that happened to you. It's something that you chose for your soul growth. And I know
this is where
it sounds
I
might be too simple.
It's not too simple, but it's hard to hear depending on where you are on your journey. So if you're in surviving, searching, fighting, when you come across that information, it feels like you're being judged.
It feels too light.
But when you're in
broad brush.
realizing, healing, and thriving, which is another thing that I love about Edgar Cayce, he said, what we each must do is have our own experience. So if I can sit in a talk and hear that, and hear that, you know, suffering is a part of growth, well, you're suffering. So what happens when you suffer, you ask yourself, well, this has got to be worth something. And you turn into the suffering to figure out what it's worth, what it's learning, you know, what you can learn from it. Because suffering happens. On
the small level, when I think most people, the things that they're most proud of didn't come easy.
Yeah.
Like, let's say your education, you didn't have to do that. You could have gone another path. And so it was a choice to work through that, and you have benefits now from having gone through that. So I think, you know, how do we mature in life?
Yeah.
And we overcome obstacles. We don't mature if we don't have obstacles.
I agree. I mean, one of the things I was doing was studying Tibetan Buddhism too, and one of the primary principles is all life is suffering. So everything that lives suffers to some extent.
Yes.
And so it was hard for me to hear that initially too, but you have to sort of work through to get to an awakening and understanding, and that sort of journeying through. And I think sometimes one of the challenges with the way that information is presented at some of the religious, like when I was in a church, for example, and some of the ways that they would present it would make it, you are blamed, like you're a sinner and it's your fault for everything that happened to you.
Yes.
Well, you know what? I might be a soul on the planet who needs to learn some things, but
yes, no, that's too shallow.
Yeah, that's kind of a little hard to hear. And then coming to the realization that thoughts are things, which means they're an energy that can influence your behavior and influence your decisions. One day that makes sense to you, the next day it doesn't make sense to you. And then along the spiritual healing journey, I've been on a lot of hospice teams where people are having to come to grips with what they live through in life at the end of life, right? And I was on one hospice team with a woman who had no spiritual tradition, but she was studying Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and she was listening to tapes from spiritual teachers. She was dying of cancer. And one thing that was said by a spiritual teacher caused her so much spiritual angst and pain that I think she died in spiritual agony. And the message was, well, everything that happens to you to some extent is your fault. It's because of your thoughts. And she screamed at me. I was sitting across the room and she said, I did not cause my cancer. I do not want to be dying of cancer today. And when I heard what the teacher was saying through the lens of having moved through surviving, searching, fighting, and what I realized was she's really talking about a dynamic of thoughts that have an influence on and put an influencing energy into our lives. She's not saying you chose your cancer from a conscious perspective.
Right.
What she's
right.
saying
we hear
is
things from the level of our
we hear
readiness.
things from the level of where we happen to be. And she also didn't hear it from thoughts might help influence your journey through what you're living through. I mean, that's kind of the things that Dr. Joe Dispenza is helping people become aware of. Dr. Gabor Mate is helping people become aware of. So, and Dr. Gabor Mate, who is the addiction specialist that you mentioned earlier, he is very careful about when he's doing his talk saying, I'm not saying you caused this condition. What I am saying is thoughts can influence your journey through what happens through this condition.
And how your emotions.
And how your emotions can play into it. And how they can maybe have a negative effect on it. I mean, one of the things that you and I talked about in the coaching class, I mean, I don't know if you remember, we were in that session, we were talking about the placebo effect, because we're both fascinated with how the placebo effect, where even if you tell people this is a sugar pill, it helps you heal.
Yeah, that's called
what's going on there?
Open blind.
Yeah, so we do an open blind. And so that really confirms the power of thinking,
And I find
thinking.
that when I think of what's hopeful
Yeah.
of this time, I think the fact that the placebo is growing.
Me
the
too.
fact that hopefulness, people,
Me too.
more and more people are able to use their mind to construct healing.
Yeah, and then the other thing too about it too is there must be a nocebo effect too. And the nocebo effect is, can you block your bliss because you just tell yourself, oh, this is not going to work, nothing's going to work, nothing's ever going to work.
That's in the readings. He
Absolutely.
says if you don't believe in your surgeon, that's not going to help you either.
Absolutely.
So his answer is basically it's all faith healing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then
faith.
all healing comes from within to some extent.
Yeah.
And so a part of our job is, again, I'm going back to Edgar Cayce, if we align with what is divine within, which is why I did that meditation, spirit is the spark in every beat of our heart, because that's what saved me. What saved me was reconnecting and really holding a belief that there is a spark of the divine within every heart you meet. And that's hard to accept and believe when you've been hurt by people,
Yes.
particularly when you've been betrayed by people who love you.
Yes.
But in looking back at the people who hurt me and betrayed me, what I look back at was they were not healed either. Wounded people wound.
Yes.
And I know there's this talk in the literature, the wounded healers. And I was like, wounded healers heal if they have healed themselves. But wounded people tend to wound.
Yes.
And if you're healing from your wounds, you may offer opportunities to help. But hurting people often hurt other people. And then people who deny project onto other people a lot of things. We oftentimes meet the projection before we meet the person. So wounded people can meet projections of, oh, you look like the person who hurt me. I'm not that person. If we're not careful, we'll treat them like that.
Hart, has been a wonderful conversation.
I know we could go on forever, but I know we have to.
Before we wrap up,
yes, sir.
With what you're doing with A.R.E. and what you're teaching, and I know you're going to start going around the country giving your lectures. What are some of the techniques, or when somebody attends one of your conferences, what do you help lead them through, or how do you help apply the Cayce work? You know, you're talking about how it's influenced you, but what might a person expect or hope that they might gain from a conference with you?
A lot of the things that I do in my workshops, we do actually chanting. We actually experience it together. I offer you the opportunity to either chant along and experience the chant. You know, Edgar Cayce does A.R.E, A.R.E, A.R.E. We may experience that. We have
and to add to that, I mean, you're probably going to say this, but you know, in the Book of Revelation, when Cayce interprets it, he says our karma is in our endocrine chakra system.
Absolutely.
And chanting as an energetic to move those energies and to allow those to come forward to healing. So you're probably going to highlight that, but that's the first thought that I had.
Well, and belief is not required to have vibrations work on your body.
And move those energies up.
And you just move those energies up, and you don't have to believe it, just try it and see if you feel anything. That's the other thing, you know, that we do, we sort of try it. And then we talk about people's practices, like what worked for you, what meditation did you use. And in the affirmation conference, we did a popcorn around what affirmation has been important to your life. And then everybody in the room sort of tried it on so you could figure out, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never thought of that. So I try to make it both experiential and sort of fun. And then I also tell stories from Edgar Cayce's life in a way that people maybe have not heard them. And
then do you guide them in an intuitive process?
We can go, it depends on what the purpose is. I did a workshop on toning, chanting, and singing for spiritual balance. And people in the class who had never done any type of singing, like you don't have to study singing so I give some very simple things you can do and try at home. And then I introduce people to practices that I have done myself in the privacy of my own space.
Well, people who haven't heard you read or sing, I mean, they're in for, your voice has a vibration and I think we all have different gifts, but you have a gift of sound through through the sound, the voice that you express. So I think that would certainly be a healing experience for people attending.
Thank you. Sometimes I use poems. Like there's one I use about life is in the intangibles, not the hard and fast.
Do you have a poem you'd like to end with? Is there
sure,
one
let's do that one.
Yeah,
let's do that one. This is called Life. Life is in the intangibles, not the hard and fast. Not in what we can have and hold, but in what will definitely pass. It's in the glance that brings a smile, connecting without words. It's in the touch of a hand to get the attention that you deserve. It's in the warmth in your heart when thoughts flow of the ones you love. It's in everything you can never touch with your hand in a velvet glove. Life is in the intangibles, and there also dwells love. If we take time to learn this, breathe, hold, and live this, both life and love will offer us a very special gift. We will know a most precious thing. We will hold life's bliss. For in the final moments before we journey into the unknown, it is our life and loves that will bind us here or guide us peacefully home.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hart. It's been a real honor to have you here today.
It's been great talking with you.
God. Thanks again. Look forward to more conversation and growth together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.